All right, today we're going to look at proportion. Proportion is the principle of design that is concerned with the size relation of one part to another. So with proportion, it's important to know it when you are designing, like say, architecture. You don't want to make houses that are too small or rooms that are not proportional to the people that are using those rooms. Also, proportion is important when you are cooking. You don't want to have too much or too little of any of the ingredients when you cook, or else it's going to taste bad. And then proportion is also very important when you are buying clothes. You don't want clothes that are too loose or too tight on you. So make sure that you buy clothes that are proportional to you. So we are constantly reminded by the entertainment media about the ideal proportions of men and women. And in my day, I don't know. Yeah, I know that magazines aren't really a thing anymore, um, but I guess it would be on the internet are um, the celebrities and popular people that are set as idealized. And I remember when Jennifer Love Hewitt, who's a very beautiful actress, there were some pictures that came out of her at the beach, and people were calling her fat, although she was normally proportioned. So, anyways, there is, especially like in the 80s and 90s, it was very chic or trendy to be ultra skinny and ultra fit. And that's still the especially for guys, it's still popular to be muscular and lean, and that is what is idealized in men. But with actresses, they all and actors, they want to be of high value, and they want to have a good body, and that gets them more roles in art. And what this has done in our society is that it has given a lot of people a eating disorders, and so we want to be aware of that. So being aware of good proportions and um, uh, but it's given a lot of people Okay, everybody, today we are going to talk about proportion. Proportion is the principle of design concerned with the size relation of one part to another. With proportion, especially architects and designers, they want to be very careful about and very aware of proportion when they are designing buildings and architecture. They want to make sure that they designed places and spaces that are appropriate for the need of them. You don't want to make rooms and buildings that are too small for people. And the same thing is true with cooking. With all the ingredients that goes into cooking, you don't want to have too little or too much of any ingredient that will make your food taste bad. And also with clothes, you want to make sure that you are purchasing and wearing clothes that are of the right size. Therefore, it doesn't make you look like odd, like these figures are here. Make sure that you buy clothes that are not too baggy or too tight. And so that's all dealing with proportions. And we're constantly reminded in entertainment media about the ideal proportions for men and women. In my day, it was all in magazines and movies and TV, and but nowadays it's all throughout the internet. So, especially in magazines, uh, celebrities and actresses and actors were all idealized, or they were all idolized because of their perfect proportions. And I remember this particular magazine cover where Jennifer Love Hewitt was photographed at the beach. And when those photographs came out, people were calling her fat, but she's not fat. She's like well proportioned. And this was at a time where the idealized or the perfect proportions in public media was the super skinny women, especially with models and runway models. But that it happened into actresses as well. But actors and models for men are they should be well proportioned with their muscles and being lean. So these actors and actresses in entertainment media have given us like a false sense of idealized proportions because these people can spend their whole day working out. They don't have like a job to go to that's 9 to 5. And also, they can hire nutritionists, they can hire cooks, they can hire trainers to keep them in this top physical condition. And there's also, nowadays, there are apps and the computer can change your face and how you look, and it gives us a false sense of identity. And what that all that has done is given a lot of people like eating disorders that people will starve themselves and still see themselves as too large. So we want to be very careful about the proportions of the human figure. And this also runs true of Barbie dolls. So Barbie dolls were often criticized for giving girls an unrealistic proportional size for for the ideal woman. So here is a cartoon showing the an average person standing next to a Barbie, and if a Barbie was a real person. So the proportions of the Barbie are completely unrealistic. And then here, a somebody has drawn lines over their body of what the proportions of Barbie would be if she was real. So Barbie is a very unrealistic ideal for women, and some people have idolized Barbie enough to they want to make themselves look like Barbie. So this Ukrainian model has had multiple plastic surgeries in order for her to look like Barbie. But when you look at her, she looks weird. It looks unnatural. She doesn't look normal. So her proportions are off because of the plastic surgeries, and so it shows how unrealistic the proportions of Barbie are. And here's another one who has had multiple plastic surgeries to look like a living cartoon, and she has cut away parts of her ribs and added things and took things away, and so that waist is so skinny, but that is so it looks weird, it looks unusual, it doesn't look realistic. So I just want you to be aware of the effect of unrealistic goals of looking like Barbie or trying to idolize actors, actresses, and people that you perceive of as uh, as beautiful. And so that's given rise to the body positivity movement. Just being happy of who you are, and try to be healthy, eat healthy, do healthy things, but you don't have to look like Barbie. And that we can see that a lot in this first semester. There's a lot of body types, but one of the first figures that we ran into was the Venus of Willendorf, and so she is definitely quite the opposite of Barbie. And so these fertility goddesses showed up a lot in the prehistoric era. All right, I do want to introduce you to the golden mean. The golden mean it's also called the golden ratio or the golden section. And if you divide a line into two parts so that the smaller part has the same proportion to the larger line as the larger line has to the whole line, then that is the golden mean. And that ratio is 1 to 1.6. And it was invented by the Greeks to control the relationships of parts in sculptures, architecture, and pottery. And you can see that 1 to 1.6 here, where the distance from in the idealized or proportions of the human figure, according to the Greeks, is that if you're if you take the measurement of from the top of the head to the waist, and then from the waist to the feet, that should be 1 to 1.6. Then you can do the same thing in the arm. If you take the arm and divide it from the shoulder to the elbow, and that's 1, then from the elbow to the tip of the fingers, that's 1.6. If you do that, you have perfect proportions of the arm. And then if you do the same thing, if you take the lower part of the arm and divide it from the elbow to the wrist, and then from the wrist to the tips of the fingers, that should be 1 to 1.6. So if you have that measurement in your arms and your body, then you have perfect proportions. Then if you take that 1 to 1.6 and turn it into a rectangle, so if your short side is 1 and then the long side is 1.6, that is the golden rectangle. And then if you take that smaller rectangle and divide it into 1 to 1.6, then you can continue dividing this rectangle into 1 to 1.6, into 1 to 1.6, into infinity. And then if you, and you can find this a lot in art. In fact, artists will often design their or compose their pictures using the golden rectangle. Now, the most of the artists in the uh, first semester don't really do this, especially anything that comes before the Greeks. Now, from the Greeks on, yes, architects and sculptors will use this golden ratio, but not before. And then if you take that golden rectangle and make a curve from one corner to the opposite corner of the square, and you keep going to the opposite corner of the square, you will turn this into infinity. It will continue on into infinity. This is called the golden spiral, and it is the perfect proportion of the ear. And you can find it also in nature. And sometimes we'll have, I find these online, where somebody will take a photograph of some news story and then say, hey, that looks like a golden spiral. It looks like a Renaissance painting, because they are following with the ideals of the golden ratio. All right. So, and websites are often designed using the golden ratio. And so when we apply this to the first semester, certainly the Greeks applied the golden ratio in almost everything they did. So you can find it a lot in their architecture and in their sculptures of people. I want to talk about scale. Scale is size as measured against the standard. So a 7 foot tall basketball player does not look tall when he's surrounded by other basketball players, but he does look tall when he's compared with a crowd of average people. And so what this does is it makes things look out of place. So if we look at this photograph here, this is a modern work of art. It's in a museum or a gallery where an artist has made extra large furniture, and the people will walk around it. That this furniture, because the people and the room set the standard for the scale in this experience, the furniture seems out of place. The furniture seems too big. It looks like furniture of the giants. And here we can see a parade where they have a float on a parade. And if you watch Pixar and Disney, you know that that is Buzz Lightyear. Now, Buzz Lightyear is a small toy that a child plays with. And in that context, the scale is very small. But in this context, he is way out of scale. That this small toy has become this extra large float that is much bigger than everything else uh, that is surrounding it. And some artists will play off this idea, like Klaus Oldenburg makes these extra large sculptures of common everyday objects. So, for example, the sculpture on the left is a book of matches, and you can see how large these matches are by the people that are standing around them. On the right is a shuttlecock or a birdie that is on the grounds of Kansas City Art Museum. But it's a small object that's now enlarged to like 10, 12, 15 feet tall. Here's another one where he takes a bicycle, enlarges it, and makes it look like it's been buried in the ground. So we have this scale, this idea of scale in ancient art in quite a few places. The um, uh, the Lamassu figures are overly sized, and um, uh, so they're out of scale. The Athena, or not the Athena Parthenos, is way out of scale. So the giant sculptures that the Greeks would put into the temples would be out of scale. The statue of Marcus Aurelius is out of scale. And then when we talk about the hierarchy of scale, we talk about, in hierarchy means things being more important than. And so people are larger based on their importance. So the father of this family is more important, and therefore he is portrayed as larger than everybody else. The king is larger than those serving him. Again, the king or the pharaoh is larger than those serving him. So we get that hierarchy of scale. We talked about the hierarchy of scale in this standard of Ur as this the king or the emperor or the leader. Even though he's sitting down, he's breaking the barrier. He's breaking the boundary because he's so large. Again, with the hierarchy of scale, and then we have these large sculptures that are they're way out of scale because they are so large. And we find that a lot in the first semester. And then there's some things that are out of scale. For example, the figure here is way too big for the horse, or he's riding on a miniature horse. So the scale is what, and then here they are at the donor portrait showing a tiny little building that they are giving, and it's meant to be symbolic, but it does look out of scale. Right, the paws of the Sphinx are way out of scale. All right, and then there are some aspects where you have things that are out of scale within the same figure. So, like in this picture right here, we have this guy on the left. His head is way out of scale. His body seems like it's normal size for the couch, but then the hand and the foot are way out of scale. And same with the figure on the far right. So we find that in the Mesopotamian figures with these overly sized eyes. And then these figures right here with these giant ears that they have. And then it goes the other way that in with the damnatio memoriae of, is it Domitian, Emperor Domitian, that he was assassinated, and then they carved over his images. Well, you can only, as you continue to carve things, it only shrinks. So his head looks like it's a bit shrunken. His head is smaller than everybody else's. When they carved Nerva's portrait over Domitian. And so, drawing the human proportions, there are certain rules to drawing the figure that is based on proportion. So the figure. So we'll talk when we in art, when we talk about the figure, we're talking about the human form in a work of art. And although a 7 foot tall basketball player and a 5 foot tall dancer vary in size, they have the same proportions of body parts. And the body parts cannot be explained in inches or centimeters. They can only be defined in ratios of one body part to another. So the standard unit for a measure for drawing the body is the head. The average height of a person is 7.5 heads tall. So this woman right here, if you take her from the top to the bottom, she is 7.5 heads tall. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then if you cut this in half, that'll be the bottom of the foot right there. Same thing with men. Men and women have the same proportion. It's 7.5 heads tall. And when we look at drawing, we try to make things a little bit easier. So we use what's called the heroic proportion. And so we use a figure that is 8 heads tall. So in drawing the figure, the first head is from the top of the head to the chin, and then the second head is from the chin to the chest. The third head is from the chest to the navel right there. The fourth head goes down to the groin. The fifth head goes down to the mid thighs. The sixth head just under the knee. The seventh head is at the shin, and then the eighth head is at the bottom of the feet. And um, artists will distort the figure to give it different feelings for or in different moods or a different kind of like aura. So this person here left, uh, on the far left, that is a normal size person, even a little bit big. That is that heroic proportion where that person is 8 heads tall. In the middle, we have somebody that is 9 heads tall. So they've elongated the legs, and this is usually quite used for fashion models, and even like a 10-headed person would be for fashion model. And I think the figure over here on the far right is 10 heads tall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. And then we have the figure in the center is 10 heads tall. And it looks a little bit weird. Her head looks a little bit small. And that's just to make her look extra tall. And then when you draw a hulking figure, they usually tend to have a small head. So they'll be 9 or 10 heads tall. So we talked about this in class where Doryphorus and Polykleitos being the artist and Doryphorus the name of the sculpture, they devised a proportion system where they are 7 heads tall. And now as I look at this, it kind of looks like his head is just a little bit too big. But that it was the canon for a long time, and then they changed it. And in art history they call this the heroic proportion. In drawing, we call somebody that is 8 heads tall the heroic proportion. So it just gets interchange. It's an interchangeable term. And then we have the proportions of the face and the head. So, your face or your head is divided into 4 quarters. From the top of the head to the hairline, that's 1 quarter. From the hairline to the center of your eyes, that's the 2nd quarter. From the center eyes to just below the nose is the 3rd quarter. And then from the just below the nose to the chin, that's the 4th quarter. So your eyes are in the center of your face, and it's uh, quite typical that people will, when they're drawing a face, they draw the eyes about 3/4 of the way up or about 1/3 of the way up. And that's the wrong placement for the eyes. Your eyes are in the center of your head. And then for the width of your eyes, you have your face is 5 eyes wide. So if you take a measurement of the eye from one corner to another, and put that on the end of the eye, and then move it out to the outside of the head, that is one eye. And then you have the second eye will be your actual eye, and then the space between your eyes is an eye. So your head is 5 eyes wide, and that's to make is proportional. And then to get the outside of your nose, you would from the middle of your uh, in the between your eyes, and then you go out to the corners of your mouth. That will give you the outer nostrils of your face. And so when we see like photographs of people that have odd proportions, that their face does not quite match up with the ideal proportions of the human face. And, and then you can, play with Photoshop and make things look bigger or smaller. And then when you see, this is what I was talking about when people draw the eyes a little bit too high in the head, it looks like the top of their head is cut off. So don't be like these people when you draw your portraits. So we can see in these portraits in the first semester that there's some oddness to them, especially right here in the portrait of Constantine. His eyes are a little bit too big, and these eyes are shaped a little bit too much like the almonds. They were idealized, and they're almost cartoonish. So the artists here are not quite looking at specific people. They're just doing this generic kind of shape of the face. But the veristic portraits of the Roman Republic, those guys were definitely looking at the proper proportions of the human face as they sculpted these pictures. As we get into Africa and some non-Western cultures, you can see whether they stray away from or adhere to the proportions of the face. And so different cultures look at the face different ways. And here you can see that the face is not quite symmetrical. One eye looks different than the other, and one side of the face looks different than another. All right, and then some artists use realistic proportion. When artists want to create or want the viewer to recognize a person, or the place or the thing being shown, they use correct proportions. It creates the illusion of reality. So here's an artist who creates these very realistic portraits, and so in the first semester, we see quite a lot of these realistic proportions that in the Etruscans had realistic proportion in this figure. Certainly, the Roman Republic used realistic proportions, but not all of the portraits that we saw or the figures that we saw are very realistic. This one has realistic proportions of the body that is not quite as idealized. There's a little bit of chubbiness to them. And I do believe that on some of these, they really do look like the person that they were modeling after. But some artists use exaggeration and distortion to express feelings and ideas. And exaggeration and distortion are deviations from the expected normal proportions. So we definitely see that in modern art where they distort from the human figure. And they distort to make things look a certain way. Like, for example, the figures on the right, look hungry because they are so thin. And the Marc Chagall figures, they look like they're in love because they're floating, and it looks like they have no bones in their body. The Gaston Chase woman looks strong because of her proportions. And non-Western cultures, especially in their masks, definitely twist and deviate from the normal and regular proportions of the face and the body. Cartoonists use distortion and exaggeration in their drawings. And comic book artists will distort and deviate the female figure and hypersexualize her as a way of selling comic books and artwork. And so we can deviate like the proportions of comic book females, the heroines, are completely impossible for the body. And when I look at comic books, I joke that all the women fight in their bathing suits, but you can distort the other way too. This figure on the right is very much like the Venus of Willendorf. She could be a fertility goddess, right? And then caricatures will also distort and exaggerate the human form. So we can find that in the first semester art. So there's the Roman Republic. Their portraits were hyper realistic. They definitely looked like the people that they were modeled after, and all the wrinkles and all the deviations from the norm. But idealized figures are also a distortion. So this Venus, or the Aphrodite of Knidos, she is distorted in that she has been idealized, that she has the idealized faces. And the figures of the Greek era are idealized. These are not realistic. It is not realistic to be this cut and have the facial features that they do. But some figures are very exaggerated and abstracted in their presentation. Some figures are elongated that we see in the first semester. And these some figures are very cartoonish, and then some figures distort the figures or the proportions between men and women, and they become androgynous. Some are realistic, some are idealistic, and then some are abstract. These are very abstract. And I don't know how realistic you can get with the mosaics, but they are certainly kind of well proportioned, but it's not realistic, so they are quite abstract. And some of these figures are quite chunky, and they are abstract. These are idealized. Remember, they have the idealized faces and the idealized proportions of their bodies. These their eyes are certainly distorted and exaggerated. So look at the distortion and the exaggeration, or the absence of distortion and exaggeration in the figures. And these guys are kind of chunky. This couple is very cartoonish. This one here, looks like the block of wood, like a block of stone that she comes from, and the proportions are very chunky as well. That she has been she's been distorted and exaggerated. These guys are very distorted and exaggerated. So there's tons of distorted and exaggerated figures in the first semester. All right, and that'll finish us for today.